response. I ring the bell and everybody stands up. As you all know, education and literacy are one of the 6 focuses of Rotary International, and I finally figured out that college is the opposite of kidnapping. They demand $100,000 from you, they'll send your kid back. And I know you also are very interested to know that today is National French Fry Day. Now, nobody knows who created National French Fry Day or why, and I'm sure that's because they wouldn't want to claim it. So, with that start, we will sing a verse of America. Today will be by Jeremy Snowden.
Let's bow our heads. God, this afternoon, we give thanks, or we're grateful, both for joys and for sorrows, for opportunity and for failure, for lack which makes resource and provision so exciting, and even for humidity that is a testament to agriculture. Your word says that we shouldn't worry because we can't count the hairs on our heads. But we can do this. We just give thanks to you for the food and for the fellowship. Amen.
And Chris will do our guest introductions today.
I think it's the first time I've ever heard giving thanks for humidity, so that's a reach, but I'll take it. As is per tradition, when a guest stands up to be recognized, please stand until all guests have been recognized, and please hold your applause until the end. I will announce the guest, I will announce the member. The member will introduce their guest. Let's see here. Mike Hall has a guest.
My guest today is Eric Smith from the Capital Journal, who's called on at the last minute to his surprise to come here to the program today.
And Anita Wolgast has a guest that some of you may know.
My guest is the father of the speaker for the program.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being here. And another guest that you may know, but Joni Underwood has a guest, visiting Rotarian.
Well, I think you've said it all, Chris.
Anyone else? Any other members have guests out there? If not, welcome.
Our featured charity this month for our company is Jobs for America's Graduates, or JAG. This is again a state-based national nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing dropouts among young people most at risk. And there's more, I think there's more information on your tables, maybe not. But please give generously. I already have, as last week I promised I was going to do. Today we have 2 red badge presentations, and I would like to have Jay Van Lerkum and Jana Ross please come to the front. And I don't think Mildred is here today, but if you are, please come forward. Jay, as you may remember, is an attorney with the Kansas Office of the State Bank Commissioner, and he's sponsored by Jay Becker. And Jana Ross is with the American Family Insurance, Shipman and Associates, and sponsored by Rayhan Reason. And both are interested in youth, community service, and international service. Excuse my semi-back here. On behalf of the board and membership of the Downtown Topeka Rotary Club, it is a great pleasure to welcome you as the newest members of our club. We look forward to the fellowship that we will share, as well as your participation in many club projects that make our community, country, and world a better place in which to live. As you may already know, Rotary is an organization of business and professional people pledged to uphold the highest ethical and moral standards. Rotary activities exemplify the charity and sacrifice that you would expect from people who believe that they have a responsibility to help others. Rotary's main objective is service in the community, in the workplace, and around the globe. The 1.2 million Rotarians who make up more than 34,000 Rotary clubs in nearly every country in the world share a dedication to the ideal of service above self. I'd like to present each of you with your red badge. Excuse me, this does not move. Your red badge, and with your Rotary packet. And in this packet, you will find a lot of information about Rotary as well as your Rotary pin, and we ask that you wear this with great pride. There'll be more information coming with your orientation, I think next Wednesday for both of you. And you each get a t-shirt. I'm not sure about the size of them. I know you have one already. And I hope you would wear this with pride at events and any place that you think it would be good for people to know that you too are a Rotarian. So, members, if you'll please stand and let's give them a warm Rotary welcome. Our program and speaker today will be Steve Wolgast, who will talk about fake news, a most scintillating title, and he will be introduced by Tamara Quinn.
A Topeka West and Kansas State graduate, Steve Wolgast's career in journalism sent him all over the world before bringing him home to teach the next generation of fact-finders. Steve spent 19 years at newspapers in Wyoming, Ohio, New Orleans, and Estonia. Steve also worked for 9 years at a little newspaper called the New York Times. He was part of Newsroom Efforts awarded the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for reporting on the 9/11 terrorist attacks and their aftermath. A decade earlier, Steve covered the final withdrawal of Russian troops in Lithuania and was detained by the Russian Navy on a nuclear submarine base in Estonia. A couple years before that, Steve was a photographer for the Topeka Capital Journal. Steve now is an assistant professor of journalism and digital media at K-State, where he is also the director of Collegiate Media Group, which publishes the campus newspaper. In doing research for this introduction, I stumbled across an email he wrote in the aftermath of 9/11. Steve was supposed to be off that day, but when he learned of the strikes, he went in and he worked. When he made it back to his apartment many hours later, he wrote to his parents to let them know he was okay. And as I read that email, I thought of how true the words 16 years ago ring true in today's tumultuous news world. He wrote, as deadlines approached, of course, everything was chaotic. So many people with so much information, all of it changing constantly. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Wolgast.
Thank you, Tamara, for that nice introduction and reference to that email. If you forward that to me, I'd appreciate it. I vaguely remember that day, because we remember all the details of it, but I certainly don't remember that. It's an honor to speak before the Downtown Rotary and to the civic and professional leaders of Topeka. You know, it's your customers and your clients who rely on you when you speak because they expect and they know that you're going to tell them the truth. Today, it's the truth that I'm going to talk about, but what happens when people trust sources that sometimes they shouldn't, and what happened when a Kansas politician, many decades ago, did not trust a source that he should have. We live in a country where everybody says they love free speech. Expressing ourselves is, of course, a constitutional right. I think a lot of people probably feel that it's a birthright, too. I just think, is there a distinction, is there a difference there? I think there is a difference between those two things. But you could say that Americans probably define themselves by having the right to say what they want, when they want it, to anyone they like. Lately, though, a lot of Americans are using free speech not to promote their own ideas, but to express their outrage at people who try to offer solutions to real problems. And we still live with an Enlightenment era notion of free speech. And that's one that depends on discussion to solve a problem. So when someone proposes a way to shore up Medicaid or to improve schools, the idea is that there's going to be an honest back and forth about that proposal. Because discussion should allow people to reach a conclusion that most of us can agree on. But the Enlightenment was a long time ago. In the 21st century, the response to a proposal is likely to be a series of ad hominem attacks on the guy's motivations. And what we get sometimes is a competition, it seems, to see who can write a put down that's the most searing, the most entertaining. To me, that's one of the great weaknesses of social media. It rewards a response that's quick over one that's cogently argued, and it rewards snark over community building. But then again, it's not easy to write a well-reasoned critique of someone's plan to solve the budget gap in 140 characters. For a longer argument, you need a medium with more space or more time, such as journalism. But journalism is under attack in the United States. I'm going to talk about two challenges to free speech today. Both come from a phenomenon called fake news, but from different directions. The second kind I'll talk about is disinformation. But my first example is the more recent definition. It's the idea of undercutting information that someone does not like. There are plenty of people on social media who put the label fake news on actual news just because they don't like to hear it and because they don't want you to believe it. Now, maybe I should add a definition of news real quick. It's generally said to be information that's interesting and relevant to an audience. And a news outlet, whether it's in print, in broadcast, or online, or all three, has a duty to publish both the information that people want to know and the information that people need to know. So you get your high school sports, you get your comics, but you're also going to get the city council and the legislature. Well, let's add to that definition of journalism. Journalism is an individual's attempt to publish the best obtainable version of facts on deadline. That's Bob Woodward's phrase, and it means that we as journalists are going to ask reliable sources what they know and share it before it becomes old news. Now, journalists also make a point of telling you who their source is so you can decide if the source is trustworthy. That sometimes has to include sources who won't speak on the record. There are plenty of government officials who will speak only anonymously. And the journalists who quote them aren't simply trying to get a scoop. Sometimes they are, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when they quote someone anonymously, they're putting their own reputations on the line because they don't know if that person's floating a trial balloon. I mean, they're anonymous, and there would be no repercussions for him or her. Well, it's one thing when a high government official won't speak on the record, but what happens when the government forbids the public from speaking on a topic? And this is the case of the newspaper editor William Allen White. He was born in Emporia in 1868 and graduated from KU, and bought the Emporia Gazette in 1895. A few decades later, he still owned the Gazette, and in the 1920s, railroad workers in Kansas who were upset about working conditions and pay went on strike. The governor of Kansas, who was Henry Allen, opposed the strike, and he had gone so far as to sign into law a prohibition on any Kansan from speaking publicly in support of strikers. In other words, when it came to a labor issue that the governor wanted to quash, the governor demanded silence of the opposition or face prosecution. Well, that did not sit well with William Allen White. He was a businessman and a journalist, and like any good journalist, he did not take well to being told to hold his tongue. got a short film from the Kansas Humanities Council. Explain this a little bit more.
You tell me that law is about freedom of utterance. And I reply that you can have no wise laws, nor free entertainment of wise laws, unless there is free expression of the wisdom of the people. And, alas, their folly with it.
In 1923, William Allen White became the first Kansan to win the prestigious Pulitzer Prize for his editorial To an Anxious Friend. The Kansas Humanities Council and the Pulitzer Foundation will be celebrating 100 years of the Pulitzer and White's legacy throughout 2016.
But if there is freedom, folly will die of its own poison, and the wisdom will survive. That is the history of the race. It is proof of man's kinship with God.
In the early 1920s, America was experiencing some tumultuous times, and Kansas was too. Coal miners in Crawford and Cherokee counties marched in protest, railroad workers went on strike, and Kansans, like many Americans, found themselves rising up with the workers, demanding things like safer working conditions, fair pay, and even reasonable time off. Now, Governor Allen, who was the governor of Kansas at the time, and the state legislators believed that government had the responsibility to curb speech in times of chaos as a way to protect peace. And White disagreed, and in fact, he argued that it was during these chaotic times when freedom of expression was really at its most vital.
You say that freedom of utterance is not for time of stress. And I reply with the sad truth that only in time of stress is freedom of utterance in danger. No one questions it in calm days because it is not needed. And the reverse is true also. Only when free utterance is suppressed is it needed. And when it is needed, it is most vital to justice.
Tensions simmered, finally came to a head in Emporia when White placed a pro-labor sign in the front window of the Emporia Gazette, the newspaper that he owned. And he was promptly arrested for that action. His response, White's response, was to write this essay, To an Anxious Friend, in which he implored Governor Allen and the legislators to protect freedom of speech for the good of our state.
Peace is good. But if you are interested in peace through force and without free discussion, that is to say, free utterance decently and in order, your interest in justice is slight. And peace without justice is tyranny, no matter how you may sugarcoat it with expedients. This state today is in more danger from suppression than from violence, because in the end, suppression leads to violence. Violence, indeed, is the child of suppression.
Tested and contested by every generation of Kansans, freedom of speech is a right that belongs to all of us.
Whoever pleads for justice helps to keep the peace. And whoever tramples on the plea for justice, temperately made in the name of peace, only outrages peace and kills something fine in the heart of man, which God put there when we got our manhood. When that is killed, brute meets brute on each side of the line. So, dear friend, put fear out of your heart. This nation will survive. This state will prosper. The orderly business of life will go forward if only men can speak in whatever way given them to utter what their hearts hold. By voice, by posted card, by letter, or by press. Reason has never failed men. Only force and repression have made the wrecks in the world.
You just heard the words. You just heard the words of the editorial that won White the Pulitzer Prize. Now, I wonder, seeing this film now several times, what if Governor Allen had had a time machine? What if he had come to 2017 before zapping back 95 years? Would he have called White's sign fake news? I don't know. But having the right to criticize people in power, criticize our elected leaders, is one of the points of free speech. Being able to speak up against the government was critical to our founders, because when they were colonists and subjects of the King of England, they didn't have very much free speech. Well, another freedom in the First Amendment is free press. When our country was new, free press referred to news that was printed on a press and spread around. Of course, we no longer need printing presses to spread information. In fact, I would say that anybody with a Facebook page or a Twitter account is now a publisher. You publish your ideas where hundreds, thousands of people can see them. And so that each of you, if you've got ideas, each of you takes advantage not only of the freedom of speech, but the freedom of the press. So when Steve Bannon in the White House said, the press should keep its mouth shut, professional journalists chuckled. Because for one thing, everyone these days is the press. There's no government rule that says, you guys are the press and the rest of us aren't. Anybody can do it. But another reason is that for journalists, our role is not simply to repeat and repackage what our leaders have to say. That's why they have spokesmen and PR departments. The job of the press is hold the powerful accountable, even when politicians do not like it, and even when they try to distract you by calling real journalism fake news. Here's a statement on deceitful speech from a president you may have missed. Nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. Truth itself becomes suspicious by being put into that polluted vehicle. We can probably tell from the words that wasn't said this year. In fact, it was written by Thomas Jefferson 210 years ago. So you can see, not only has this notion of not everything you can believe in the papers is true been around a while, but even one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence, after a life in public service, can have his mind changed about the value of a free press. But just because a politician doesn't like the free press doesn't mean the press should back down. That's because politicians work for all of us. Now, if there's one idea about a free press I'd like you to keep thinking about, it's this. The point of the First Amendment is not so that journalists can go and write whatever they want about whoever they want and get away with it. The point of the First Amendment is so that all of us, so that we the people can have information and ideas about the government and lots of other things, even if the government doesn't want us to have that information. That's why we're a democracy. The delivery method for that information is often messy and it sometimes includes mistakes. But the progress of humanity is not always efficient or smooth. Well, one of the inefficient barriers to providing reliable information are the people who want to deceive us into believing something that's false. And that's my second topic. Like the first, the label fake news doesn't really fit because news aims for accuracy and fairness. But deception disregards accuracy and fairness. To me, the better word is propaganda. And that's an uncomfortable word to use because of its association with the repressive regimes of the last century. So keep in mind that propaganda as a word has been around since the 17th century, when it was used to refer to propagating the gospel. It came to have its modern meaning a couple of hundred years ago when it was used to refer to spreading information in a biased or misleading way. Well, so what is fake news? Well, in the sense we saw in the last campaign, and even through these days and this week, the definition is still being written. But here's one way to think of it, based on the idea of a reporter for the British Broadcasting Corporation. And he suggests that it's fake news, or maybe even propaganda, if it intends to deceive, and if it intends to make money, or to influence an outcome. So we'll go through an example of how some of this information gets spread through the media. We'll see what we decide for ourselves. So brace yourself. Everyone freak out. America is running low on bacon. Pig farmers can't keep up with the overwhelming supply for frozen pork belly. All right, that was dated February 1, about 5 months ago. And here's the beginning of the article. I'll just read the first couple of lines to you. Hard as they try, the nation's pig farmers can't keep up with the overwhelming demand for frozen pork belly. Quote, today's pig farmers are seeing historic records are setting historic records by producing more pigs than ever. Rich Deaton, president of the Ohio Pork Council, told USA Today, quote, "Our reserves are still depleted." Do any of you remember this? Did you go out and stock up your deep freeze with bacon a few months ago? This is not made up. I mean, the screenshot is not made up. Well, if this were February 1, and you were someone who likes bacon at breakfast or BLT, you might wonder, well, if I'm looking for commodities news, do I look to Men's Health magazine? Probably not. Well, let's look for some other information. They refer to USA Today here, so let's see, well, where did they get their information? Well, here's a post from USA Today, also on February 1. They've got the picture of bacon, so we know it's going to be important. That's, what you see is actually an article, it's a video, it's a screenshot of a video about the bacon shortage. And the video was produced by a news service called Voyeur. That's the little logo on the bottom left, the red dot. Now the narrator, this piece is narrated, there's no other person speaking, there's no interview. The narrator reads the same quote from Rich Deaton that you saw on the previous slide. Well, if you want to know if February 1, this is February 1, is this the day to switch my 401k to pork bellies? Maybe you want to go to a business publication. So how about Business Insider? The date is still February 1, the photo is still of bacon. The headline tells us that prices could skyrocket. That's pretty important news if you're an investor. And it includes the same quote, word for word, over there on the right from Rich Deaton. It's hard to tell, but at the bottom here, see the colored words there, it refers to the quote coming from a statement. So there's a hyperlink. So we can click on the hyperlink, and it takes us to Ohio's Country Journal. It has the same quote from Rich Deaton, but it was posted on January 31, the day before these others. And to their credit, they skipped the photo of bacon. The article itself, here's the same quote from Rich Deaton, some other information, but in the bottom, here at the bottom of the article, in green with my blue arrow, it says if you want to get more information and updates, you can click on baconshortage.com. Interesting site, so you click that. Here's what the page looks like. Right, that's what it used to look like. If you go there today, and the page is blank, just a big white screen. I don't know what the page actually looked like when the Ohio Country Journal linked to it. This is found through those internet archives from December. But whatever it was, you got to admit that flying pink pigs don't really instill a lot of confidence. So here's a question for you. Is this news? Is it fake news? Or did these reporters fall for a hoax? Well, how could you tell? Well, the answer to that question is you can tell by using some critical thinking. The alarmists were debunked by the practical example of critical thinking, which is some journalism. The Times was the only source of these 5 to actually pick up a telephone and talk to Rich Deaton live on the phone, right? Instead of copying and pasting a press release or copying someone else's article that copied a press release. And the result is context. There's an economist in here quoted he's on the right side up there, saying, but it's not as if we're going to run out of bacon. It's a very different take on things from those other headlines. And Rich Deaton himself, the guy who's quoted repeatedly in these other articles, tells the Times that baconshortage.com was created by his own organization. Why? It was a marketing opportunity. So I'm going to help sell some bacon, I suppose. But now, if all you knew about bacon is what you'd read in those other sources, this would come as a surprise to you, I think. Well, here's the takeaway. Simply reporting what someone else said is not journalism. Repeating others' words without checking to see if they're true goes by the technical term you probably already know, gossip. But instead, one of these reporters practiced journalism. That reporter talked to some people who originally published the information so he could ask questions and put the news in context. And this article from the Times was also published on February 1, within hours of the confused articles, showing that it does not take months of research to get to the bottom of a press release. And I'll take a look at the paragraph in the lower box, which I've highlighted with pink there. From later on in the same article, it says, to create a panic, quote, was not our intent, Mr. Deaton added with a laugh, quote, we can't control how the news is interpreted. Well, we can't control others' thoughts, but we can direct those thoughts. And I think you would agree that the Ohio Pork Council isn't entirely innocent. I mean, if you create a website called baconshortage.com, you've got to take some responsibility when people think there's a shortage of bacon. So here we are, in a world where you can't always rely on your source, whether that's the Business Insider or the Ohio Pork Council. So what can you do, as a reader, to defend yourself against people who want to persuade you not by facts, but by falsehood? Well, in journalism, we believe in the importance of skepticism. If a source tells you something, you're supposed to check it out to see if it's true. So you ask questions no matter who the source is, and no matter how basic the question sounds, you ask it anyway. That's why there's a newsroom maxim that's repeated to every cub reporter that goes, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Well, I checked before. But sometimes reporters feel the urge to publish online before running a claim by knowledgeable sources or before letting editors have a chance to take a look at it. And when they post it, the public pulls out their cell phones and we gobble it up. Yet if we, the public, can't wait for some fact-checking, we open ourselves to the chance to being fooled. So let's get back to being skeptical. How do you do it? I've got a few ideas that are used by journalists, and everybody who consumes it nowadays should look at it too. The first one's the most obvious. If it sounds too good to be true, or if it's outrageous, it probably is. There is no reason to freak out. Sourcing. This is, also overlaps with fact-checking in journalism. Is the article actually correct? The Men's Health said that Rich Deaton essentially spoke to USA Today. Well, what happened was Deaton wrote a press release that was reported on by Ohio's Country Journal, which was spoken as part of a video of a news service that was posted on the website of USA Today. So Deaton was several steps removed from USA Today. And that's a distinction with the difference when we're talking about facts. Clear writing is important too. Now, little errors may just be little errors, slips of the fingers as you're typing, but sometimes this one, confusing supply and demand, could reveal an embarrassing unfamiliarity with the basics of macroeconomics. We also believe in named sources. That's what the reader can evaluate the credibility of the person speaking. Or if there's going to be anonymity, the reporter needs to say why. Maybe the person is not authorized to speak on the record. Maybe if the person does so, she could be fired. Or maybe the person would be in personal danger for speaking. Probably not about bacon, but it can happen. So if it's going to be analysts predicting, or in the typo here, analyst predict, we've got two problems. One is grammar. Second, why is this person granted anonymity? If you're talking about bacon, you probably don't really need anonymity. And the quotes should come from an interview, not solely from a press release. The reporters use a press release just as a tip sheet anyway. They're not going to quote from the thing. I just wrote one today with something in K-State and invented the quote from my colleague. This is what happens. If you don't know this, that's how press releases are done. They're rarely said by the person who's quoted in the thing. And then finally, you want to have a competent outside source who can comment on the news of the day. That by an outside source, it's someone who doesn't have a stake in the outcome. Not someone who's a pig farmer, not somebody who represents pig farmers or sells bacon at grocery stores. None of that. This guy was a pork analyst. So what we see here is 4 publications that did no fact-checking. One publication did fact-checking, and it changed our understanding of the news of the day about bacon. But now that you know how you can do some fact-checking, it's up to you to think critically about the next unbelievable or outrageous post you see, even if it's not about bacon. And then consider that before you click like and retweet it. That's it. Thank you very much. I guess we've got some time for a few questions if anyone would like to prolong the torture. Yes, in back.
And how do you teach K-State, I got 2 daughters in college, how do you communicate to them? And our kids are being raised in a very politically defined environment, how do you communicate to your students? And not to wax too political here, but how do you communicate to them about the president, the strongest political make the suggestion that everything is fake news? I mean, aside from the skepticism, what have you?
So how do we teach college students to realize even if somebody who's in the most powerful job in the country and the world says everything that he dislikes is fake news, well, is that true or not? But it comes down to, like, as I said, everything that someone says is worthy of being challenged. You say, well, what do you mean? How can you give me an example of that? And of course, it's not like any of us can go up, ask the president a question. Presidents are very busy people. But we can do this in other ways, and that's where we get the outside sources. Well, is this claim legitimate or not? Was the claim of fake news? Or what was the thing that whether it's the president or anybody else is criticizing? If you look at those sources, is it real or isn't it? So how do you explain this to students? I walk them through some practical examples, sort of like this one with bacon. I have other ones that I can use as well that show, well, you can really be led down that rabbit hole thinking, wow, this is amazing. Wow, did you know? Pass this on and all this. And, but if you step back a little bit, if you have a broader perspective, you often find something else. I had one colleague said she was going to try this, and she did this in class. And she said, she had a lot of seniors in the class. It was in the spring semester. Did you hear that K-State is going to charge $50 for you to participate in graduation? So if you want to go to graduation and get your diploma, you're going to have to pay $50 on your account before graduation. You're not going to be allowed to graduate. And they did this, right? They're tweeting this out. And then after a while, she says, no, I just made that up. But what did you do? What was your reaction? Did you go to the K-State website to find out? Or you just spread it right away? Someone else? Yes.
I just had, again, this is a suggestion, and it seems like an old one, but it does help because a lot of people that say things, I don't even think sometimes it's malicious. It's just, oh my God, that sounds horrible, or oh my God, that's how I feel, and look, now I know it's right, and they spread it. But Snopes is still a great source, and you can usually find that, put that in the search, and it'll say false or kind of true, and then just cut and paste it in, and a lot of times they'll say, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about that, and they'll delete it, take it down, it's not offensive. And then what I found with a lot of people is they're so quick to judge other sites that they don't like as being, well, that's fake news, that's just someone, that's just a blogger. And then the next day, it's the so-and-so report, this guy's great. And it just happens to be because they politically agree with them.
Right.
But it's the same stuff. Yeah.
So how to, one of the sources he mentioned was Snopes, SNOPES.com. Just been around for 20 years. I remember going to it back before all this stuff happened. You could look up all sorts of, these myths, urban myths, and they show whether it's true or not, the alligator in the toilet kind of thing. Of course, now they're working overtime with all this other stuff. Another one's PolitiFact. But then as you also mentioned, well, it's also going to be criticized. Well, PolitiFact, they're just a bunch of liberals out together. They're just pushing a point of view. Well, there's another point I'd like to make is that journalism is often said that it's supposed to be unbiased and that it's supposed to be straight down the middle, and that's definitely a goal. But first of all, who among us is unbiased? We're all biased toward or against something, even if it's K-State or KU, and that's a perfectly fine bias to have. But the other thing is, America is one of the few, only places where the press is held to this impossible standard. If you read even newspapers in the UK, you'll see they're much left or they're right. They have points of view. If you know another language, read newspapers in those languages, and you'll see. The reason that newspapers became unbiased in the United States was back in the 19th century. There were lots of newspapers in each city for the working man, for the professionals, for the bankers, for the farmers, for the Catholics, for the German immigrants, and so forth. And they all had a narrow slice of the market. Someone had this idea, bought a failing newspaper, and thought, well, if I just write to everybody, I can sell a lot more newspapers. So it was this capitalist idea. The newspaper that he saved from failing was the New York Times. So trying to be unbiased is a way to make money, is how it came about.
Steve, thank you very, very much for that very enlightening and extremely important talk. And don't leave, because we, instead of giving a stipend or a cup that you don't want that will gather dust, we provide for Ross Elementary School a book in your honor, and we would ask that you would sign this for us, please. So, just before you leave, please. And I hope you might be able to stick around and have other conversations if you're interested. We have a couple of announcements. Next week, we will be right back here in this room. Our program will be Casey kilts talking about sheepdog impact assistance. And one other item of announcement is that I don't know if you know that Kathleen Height had to resign from our board because of work and volunteer constraints. And I'm so pleased to let you know that yesterday our board unanimously and very enthusiastically affirmed Larry Goronsky as her replacement for the next 2 years. So if you have any problems or questions, go to Larry. Today, I would like to leave you with the words of Donald Gale, who said, "A pessimist, they say, sees a glass as being half empty. An optimist sees the same glass as half full. But a giving person sees a glass of water and starts looking for someone who might be thirsty." So in keeping with the spirit of Rotarians all over the world, let's all look for that person who might be thirsty. So let's now stand and say the four-way test +1. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial for all concerned? Have a great week.